Hey everybody, I'm Doug and that's Connor, and this is a very caffeinated edition of the Bethel School District Presents podcast. We are going to talk, Connor, about coffee a little bit later on, but before we get there, we're going to talk about school district budgets, a very important topic, and we want folks to understand out in our community and our staff and even students that are listening, there's a lot of intricacies about school funding, and we're going to dive into them. Now, this summer, there's been a lot of news stories. You don't have to Google too far to find that many districts in our area, neighbors and those up north and south, are struggling a bit financially.
Indeed, we're all seeing those stories of layoffs and even school closures all around Washington. But here in Bethel, we're actually doing better than most, and that's thanks to the hard work and difficult decisions made by senior leaders to get us on the right path. Only a few years ago, the district was in deficit spending, but that has changed, thankfully. Chief Financial Officer Brian Verily talked about that during a recent school board meeting.
You can see we had those 3 difficult years of deficit spending just a few years ago. Last year, you were about as flat as you can be. That's kind of what you want to do as a school district. You spend the revenue on the students that you receive for the year. This year, we're projecting right now we're going to have a little bit of surplus and just high level next year about the same amount of deficit. So over those 3 years, we'll be pretty flat is the goal. Reminder, revenue has over this time period risen a little bit slower than expenditures. And then our fund balance was around 69 million, but most people would say that's high for the amount of spending we do every year. If we're spending $390-ish million, 39 million is about 10%. And a lot of districts try to stay around that 10% number. As you can see, we're pretty flat in these projected years.
Before we go any farther, I love how he says $390-ish million. Funny way to talk about that much money. And we are talking about big numbers here because we are a big school district. Lots of students means lots of staff. 80% of our budget is in salaries and benefits. In fact, we're one of the biggest employers in Pierce County.
So you may have heard he said something about general fund balance. Now, that's not something everyone understands. We're not for profit, so we need to spend what we get money-wise. But you do need to have a little bit in the bank. Some districts say about 10% for a variety of reasons.
So it's kind of like an emergency fund?
Exactly. But there are other reasons too.
Cash flow fluctuates throughout the year. We get different amounts from the state. We get 2 big months of property tax revenues, but our expenditures are pretty steady because our biggest expense is payroll. We have a couple of months that are higher than others because of vacation cash outs and stuff like that. But it's our revenue that tends to fluctuate a lot throughout the year from month to month. So we don't want to have to borrow to meet those cash flow needs. Bond ratings, the rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's that rate our bonds when we build schools, one of the top things they look at is your fund balance. And if your fund balance is decreasing, you're going to have basically a lower credit rating and pay more for that money that you're borrowing to build those schools. Also, emergencies. You never know when emergency is going to come up. Cash reserve will help mitigate that. Limiting disruptions to current programs. So if we were to have a sudden decline in enrollment or other factor in state funding, your fund balance can allow you to get through those tough times without making drastic cuts right away. So it just smooths disruptions from year to year.
He covered a lot of ground there. One thing he mentioned was our bond rating. And here again, Bethel has done exceptionally well. In fact, done something other districts haven't been able to do. Our bond rating, which is AA2, there's only one bond rating higher than that school districts can get in Washington state. Our bond rating stayed the same, while other districts have actually seen their bond ratings drop.
Quick clarifying question. Our budget's based on the number of students we have, right?
That's right. And unlike other districts, Bethel is still seeing a little bit of growth while other districts are not. So that's in our favor as well. Another clarifying question would be, where does our money come from?
Well, if you follow school funding, you'd be able to guess it's state, federal government, and local levies. But here's the actual breakdown.
Most of it comes from the state, about 77%. And about 70% of that 77% comes from the prototypical funding model. That I like to talk about quite a bit, but other big sources of revenue is the special education funding we get from the state. Transportation funding, we'll get just under 18 million we're projecting for next year. LAP about 11 million, and many other smaller state programs will add up to that 305 million from the state. The federal government, are projecting 36 million. The biggest there is actually food services at about 10 million. Title I's 6 million, special ed from the federal government's another 6 million, and a whole bunch of other smaller programs.
Now, Brian mentioned the prototypical funding model, and that's something I think we need to break down for folks.
Yeah, for sure. I don't understand it.
Well, Webster's defines prototypical as...
Stop. Let's not go there. Let's have Brian clear it up for us.
The number of prototypical positions are determined by the number of students you have. So there's a formula, and it's different for different grade levels. Like K through 3, you get one prototypical teacher for every 17 students. At the higher grades, it's closer to one teacher for every 25 points, 25 to 20. It depends on the grade level. Let's say one for every 26 students. Just a reminder for how these numbers are determined. And then the state gives you money based on those numbers.
All right, I'm going to need a little bit more than that.
Well, that's not a problem because School Board President Marcus Young Sr. knows this can be a hard thing for folks to understand. So he and Brian Verley had a little Q&A to help people understand what the prototypical funding formula actually is.
For you all, slide number 10 is a slide that actually lays out the term we've heard, prototypical model for funding from the state for both certificated, classified, and certificate administrators. Just for our questions today, we're going to talk about the first one, understanding that what we're going to talk about and the questions I'm going to ask fit each one of those categories.
Yes, they do.
Okay. So the first question is this slide stating that per what the state's public school funding model suggests, a certificated staff member is funded at $82,902 a year?
Yes, that is correct. And that's for next year, just to be totally clear.
That's for next year.
Yes.
Okay. So just to be clear, this is the base amount that the state pays for any certificated staff member to the district.
To Bethel district at 6% regionalization, yes.
Okay. So if we were to put this in the simplest equation, one FTE, which is what you talked about before, equates to a full-time certificated staff. And based upon a school's enrollment, if they qualified for 10 FTEs, that is 10 full-time employees at $82,902, which would equate to $828,020. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Does the state take into account or have any type of scale in pay that accounts for the experience of years for certificated staff?
We do not receive any, and the vast majority don't, but there is a few districts that receive an experience factor, but that hurdle is extremely high. And even when I look at our scattergram of kind of where our teachers are, I think we have a lot on the high end, but we're not even close to reaching that hurdle.
To be able to qualify for that.
Be able to qualify, and actually is a very small addition what you get for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in most contracts,
districts,
when we look at the contracts, in most contracts, we do have different steps that include the years of experience, which we should, or degrees or things of that nature.
Education and years,
Okay.
both. And I'm going to state,
Yeah.
So our salary schedule, if you're a BA, so a bachelor's degree with no additional units and 0 years of service, so your first year working at the district, that's about $63,000.
Okay.
And the top end, if you've got a master's plus 90 or doctorate with the maximum number of years, that's just under 120,000. So that's the range on the salary schedule. And there's steps all along up, across
Up and down.
with experience and with education units. Yes.
Okay. When we use the term certificated staff, is that referring to just teachers?
No.
So who does that all include?
It's librarians, it's counselors, it's nurses, it's psychologists, it's TOSAs, it's social workers. It's anybody who needs a certificate, but is not an administrator.
So when you stated at the beginning that range, was that just the teacher range, or is that in that group period, or do they each have their own ranges?
In our district, they do not have their own salary schedules. They're all in the same salary schedule.
They're all in the same salary schedule. Okay. What's the average pay of a certificated staff?
This year, it's $94,745.
Okay. So what percentage of our staff are above the prototypical model amount?
72% are above that.
So 72% of the certificated staff that we have are above $82,902.
Yes.
Okay. If we have staff who are above that 82, which we just explained that we do, who makes up that difference?
the district from other sources, and most of it's honestly from the levy.
Okay.
But there's other programs that might have not fully spent it. The indirects that I talked about from ESSER could help pay for that also. Any program that underspends unrestricted money could help pay for that.
They'll pay for that.
If it's restricted though, they can't help pay for that,
Okay.
obviously.
And so levies are part of that we'll utilize.
Levies are a part of that.
But levies were, the intent of levies were to be able to pay for extra programming, things of that nature. You don't normally want to use the levy money to make up salaries.
That is generally true, but there's different philosophies at different districts, obviously, on the importance of different things. And so there's some argument to help supplement different needs with levy money. But at the highest level, yes, levy money is for additional services beyond basic education.
Okay. Based upon this model, what is the amount that we have to make up each year?
This is a rounded number. So a little bit over $30 million of our levy goes to make up not just certificated extra
Right.
salaries, but extra salaries above the prototypical funding for salaries.
And once again, this is not to point out that teachers get or make this, the concept.
Because if I look close at this, every one of these groups, the average is higher and we're staffed higher.
Right, right, which is the necessity that we have. Once again, the purpose of the questioning was to bring light when we talk about in board meetings that the state does not pay for public education. For the average person, that does not make sense. They know that the state pays. They don't know the details of what that looks like. When we throw out the term prototypical model, the average person does not know what does that mean. So the purpose of the questions was to bring and marry the two, that the common person can understand, whether it's they're on now or they come back and watch later, that there is a lot that not just our school district, but many other school districts have to make up in all categories in order to make school work for students. And most schools, most teachers would say that still isn't enough. They would say they still need more help. Students would say they still need more help. And so with that, just wanting the average person to understand that when we say these terms and when we say this, that there is a due diligence on their part, as well as our part, that we demand that the state step up to the plate so that we don't have these things where we have these internal battles of we need more money. Understand that. We need more money, on both ends, right? And so I just wanted to bring clarity, once again, not to point out any particular group, but just to really bring reality that a lot of districts are shortchanged when it comes to running school.
Now, there is more to this presentation, and you can watch the whole thing by going to bethelsd.org and clicking on Board Docs.
There, you can view the presentation or dissect the 190-page PDF of the budget itself.
I saw you printed that out this morning.
It's light reading.
I don't know about that. Sounds like you might need a cup of coffee for it. And Connor, I want to talk about coffee. I know you are quite the
Fiend. Go ahead and say it.
Enthusiast is what I was going to say.
Generous way of saying it.
I have 4 coffee-related trivia questions for you to close out our show today. So we're going to start out easy. For someone who claims to have lived in Seattle for a little while, you should know this right off the top of your head. When and where did the first Starbucks open its doors?
That is a good question, which I should know. I'm going to say right off the bat, I don't, but I'm going to give it an educated guess. We obviously know it was Seattle. Pike Street is going to be the correct location.
That's right.
I'm going to say 1989.
89, the same year Taylor Swift was born.
If you say so.
I do say so. Well, the Starbucks story begins in 1971.
Sheesh.
Along the cobblestone streets of Seattle's historic Pike Place Market. That's where Starbucks opened their very first store. They offered fresh roasted coffee beans, tea, and spices. They had 1 employee at the time. Their name was inspired by the classic tale Moby Dick, evoking the seafaring traditions of early coffee traders.
So I get half credit for that, right? That's all I care about.
I'll definitely give you a 0.5 on that one. That was not too shabby. Okay, while we're at Starbucks, let's talk about the most expensive Starbucks coffee that has ever been ordered. I'm just looking for a price, and I guess we can't do Price is Right rules since you're the only one playing here. You would just guess $1. So be within $5 of this most expensive Starbucks order.
So our regular listeners will recall our new nurse administrator, Angela Radonsky, had a very intricate coffee order at Starbucks.
She did.
I'm going to say she's got to be close. She didn't say how much that cost, but I'm going to say $15.
$15 is a good guess. I did see some Frappuccinos upwards of that amount. The most expensive Starbucks order, I'm going to give you two, actually, because the first one's not that interesting. There was a guy who ordered 170 espresso shots with coconut milk. Cost $148.99.
That's wild.
It seems excessive.
Buy an espresso machine.
The second most costly drink, this one's more interesting because I actually gave a name. YouTuber, you knew it was going to start with that, Elton Castle ordered a Grande Americano with 102 shots of espresso, caramel drizzle to reduce the bitterness of the drink, and he and his friends couldn't actually finish it. It was $102.15.
So here's where we get into the weeds a little bit.
Love it.
Grande is an actual size. There's an ounce
I thought
associated
so too.
with Grande.
Yes.
So you can only fit so many shots of an espresso in a Grande. So is it really a Grande if it fills, 500 ounces of liquid?
That's a great question. And could he have got it for a little cheaper if he just ordered a tall? I'd like a tall coffee with 100 shots of espresso.
That's where he's losing the money. Should have ordered a venti.
There's many issues with this story. Our final question. On the show Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee with Jerry Seinfeld, he drives around with a very famous comedian on the show who had his first cup of coffee ever on that show. Who was that comedian?
Oh, that's interesting because I have watched many of those episodes, but I do not recall this. So this is going to be just a straight up guess.
Love it.
Stalling for time.
Stall a little more.
Stalling further.
Would you like a hint?
Give me a hint.
He was 63 at the time and had never had coffee.
Boy, I'm going to say I'm going to go out and say Kramer himself, Michael Richards.
That is a good guess. He was on the show, but this is not him. It's actually the one and only Jay Leno.
Wow.
Claimed he had never had coffee. He tried it. He hated it, and Jerry finished his cup.
What a weirdo.
I saw him sit on that desk for many years with a coffee cup. I don't know what was in it, but it wasn't coffee, I guess.
Stolen coffee valor.
Well, Connor, that was a fun conversation today. A little history of coffee and a lot of school budget talk. I learned a lot today.
I'm glad I could teach you.
We'll be back next week, everybody, with another great episode.